I made this clock for the little kids in our family. It's to teach them about telling time and about mechanical things, how things work. And it's just sort of a mechanical toy that they can take apart and play with the pieces and put it back together, if they have the concentration to put it back together. But it's sort of fun to play with, and adults seem to think it's an interesting conversation piece too, which I didn't really intend. So this video is just about a little bit about how I made it and how it works. A lot of people ask, does it tell time? And it doesn't, at least not right now. I've thought about maybe adding later on a motor right here that engages probably this gear and can actually make the clock go on its own. But for now, it's just hand driven. When it hangs on the wall like this, you just move the hands, move the minute hand, and the hour hand runs along in the proper time in a 1:12 ratio to the minute hand. And then at the top of every hour that the minute hand comes around, the striker hits the bell at the top. I'll show that working better on the wall. The striker it's not spring loaded, it's just driven by gravity, and this extended portion of the arm here is essentially the counterweight, if this is the fulcrum right here, and that provides enough weight for the striker to go and actually hit the bell. And I wanted to tuck it in as close as I could underneath this gear right here, which is the hour gear, and get as close as I can to the intermediate gear here, so the end of the counterweight is rounded just to the same radius as the teeth on the intermediate gear, so it fits nicer. I'll show a close-up of that so you can see it a little bit better. But the purpose of it is to, of course, you can run it forward or you can run it backward. And this actually was one of the big challenges, running it backwards. I'll explain why in a minute. The numbers are magnetic. This is a piece of steel, which came from an old dishwasher of ours. 2 concentric circles on the piece of sheet metal and cut it out so it's a big donut. It's mild steel, so it's magnetic. And the numbers are scrap 1x, which I drilled a 1/2-inch hole, various numbers of them, and then neodymium magnets dropped in to within about a 1/16 of an inch of the other side, as close as it can be to this side of the number, and then filled with a wooden plug and cut off flush and sanded, and then the whole thing is just stained. You might not know it at first unless you looked and saw the wood plugs are concealing something there. Kids think it's pretty cool because they just appear to be wooden and yet magnetic for some reason, so even the big numbers. But the fun thing about it for them is that the numbers can be taken off and mix and matched, you know, whatever kids do. Throw them at each other. Yeah, they can be swapped around and then put back together or whatever. What else is cool about it is, as much as possible, I tried to make it so it could all come apart. So these 3 knobs just unscrew. These are all different size nuts that I made knobs for, so they can only go in one spot on their respective posts here. The hands just pop right off, and they're labeled minute and hour. The hour hand is driven by 2 different size dowels here. There's also 2 magnets embedded in this piece too. So 2 magnets in here and 2 dowels here, but the dowels are different sizes, so they can only fit in one orientation in the hour wheel. So it fits that way, but not that way. Where the magnets are in here, there's also 2 corresponding magnets in here that hold it locked in place, or lightly locked in place. The minute hand, the hollow shaft for it fits concentrically inside of this one. And this is the hardest piece of wood I had laying around. It's sugar plum or persimmon. It's the kind of wood that they used to make old golf club heads with. So I just cut out a little shaft on the bandsaw that can be glued onto this plywood hand that's built up. A little bit of extra strength right here. And Then I cut a notch out right there, and that notch, when it's put down here, engages this little screw, and that's what drives the minute hand. And that's, of course, this shaft is just an old bolt, and it's concentric inside of the hour hand. And to get the hour hand off, there's a keyway I cut on the scroll saw, and it matches the shape of the countersunk screw, which is actually the driving pin for that minute hand. So this wheel right here is the minute wheel, and it's just an old, actually square head bolt I found just laying around, and I drilled into the side of this and tapped it. I think this is 832, and this is just a countersunk screw. So that screws into there, and that's more or less permanent, and that's what engages that right there. That's what turns the minute hand. And it seems pretty durable. That wood is, it's not really worn down at all. So this is the minute wheel. This is the hour wheel with the keyway for this drive pin or drive screw to fit through, so it can be removed like that. This is the intermediate wheel, and this is what does the magic of converting 12 revolutions of the minute wheel into 1 revolution of the hour wheel. So you can read more about that, or maybe I'll do a different video about that later on. And then this, once you have it apart, also comes into 2 pieces. And once again, this is 2 different dowels that fit into the 2 different size holes, so it can only go in one spot, like a puzzle. So that's completely apart. The next thing is the striker arm, and the striker arm is what engages with this. This actually doesn't come off the face of the clock. It's screwed in. At least it doesn't come off quickly. It's really meant to be permanent, unless it needs to come off to modify it or work on it or whatever in that unlikely event. So this is the snail gear. It sort of resembles the snail gear traditionally found in clocks, but it's much simpler here. All it does is the counterweight is pulling down with gravity. Think of it as being held or spring loaded by gravity. And as this goes around clockwise at the same rate as the minute wheel, it's a continuous radius until right about here. And then the radius increases slowly up to about 3/4 of an inch above what the original radius was. And this tooth rides along it, and then once the minute hand reaches 12 o'clock, or whatever number a kid happened to put there, then it will drop off the ledge and boom, it strikes the bell. Let's just say whoever's playing with it, if they're going clockwise with it, they might be tempted to then take it and run it backwards. Well, the problem with something that's made out of wood and not exactly the strongest thing in the world, the challenge is if this tooth was fixed in place on this arm, then rotating this backwards would quickly break this and snap it off. So it's also a mechanism to allow the clock to be run backwards, the tooth to get out of the way. It can climb up over the other side of this drop off here and not get damaged. So forward and backwards. And the challenge of doing that was figuring out how to make this thing get out of the way and not get broken. I drew this tooth up, or follower, like a cam follower, to be just the right shape so it would fall cleanly off the edge there. It's spring loaded. It hits that and stops. So that's the rest position. That's how it gets out of the way. These hooks, they're cup hooks from, they used to be under our mantle. The spring is from an old printer. It's just the right length and just the right tension. Spring coefficient, whatever you like. And then the whole thing is glued together. This is another piece of that sugar plum or persimmon wood, which is very stiff and durable, and probably won't wear out or break on this shaft right here. So it's all glued together and then gone over like everything else is with a coat of stain and urethane. This is, I can't remember what that came out of, some old piece of electronics. Here is one of those pieces. I can't remember what piece of electronics that came out of, but all I did was chuck up this, the threaded end in the drill press, and use the file running along the just a prescribed spot along the length of this. And what that did was made a groove that I could put a snap ring in. Or is that an E-ring? Somebody correct me. Anyway, that fits in the groove and that locks this on the shaft from falling off. This is, the bell is just an old like dinner bell sort of thing. The bell had a plastic handle, which I cut off. I threaded that with a tap and then used that as the actual striker that hits the bell. It's the bell's own handle. And then of course this is a knob to adjust if it's ringing too loudly or too softly. The striker, there's a T-nut there that I just pressed into this thing. And this is a bolt with the handle pressed onto the end. So it can be adjusted in for louder or out for softer, or you could adjust it all the way out and not have it strike at all, be a little bit quieter. So that's how the striker works. And last, what you're left with is these wooden bosses that are screwed, in this washer. These are screwed with counterboard holes. This one has 4, this has 2. They're screwed to the face, which is an old piece of MDF. It was a cut-off piece and that I painted black and screwed the metal bezel to. And counterboard with some screws to hold it on the face nice and firmly. And the shafts are pieces of old printer rod. This came from an old printer, fax machine, whatever. It's excellent for this sort of purpose. Probably have the remnants of these ones in here somewhere. It looks like I might have used that one. And so on. Okay, the hands. I'm sorry, the numbers, of course, are all magnetic. And actually, we're sticking to this table right now, which is just the steel table of my table saw. This outer bezel is just a waste piece that was cut off from a board that I cut for something else on the table saw. And I steamed it and bent it around in a circle, and it's just screwed in at more or less regular intervals with these little tiny, they're actually drywall screws. I happen to have a bunch of them, but they were all the same and they look kind of neat. The numbers are free to move about wherever people want to put them. So you can have it appear to run backwards, or you can mix and match and make it make no sense, or whatever. Nevertheless, that's how they work. There we go. I can't tell if that's perfectly straight or not from your perspective, but this is how it goes back together. The snail gear stays on, always. The striker arm goes on first, and the intermediate gear with its smaller gear that mates with it goes together. It goes on there. The minute wheel goes onto the snail. The hour wheel gets over top of this shaft with the keyway for the drive screw. The hour hand goes on, the only way it will go on, and the minute hand fits into that notch right there with that drive screw. Now it's together. And the minute hand lines up with the ledge, with the drop off on the snail. And then it's just a matter of remembering which knob goes where. That goes there. That goes there. It hangs on the wall with, this is called various things, French cleat, museum rail, things like that. It's usually meant to hang very heavy pictures or artwork or whatever, cabinets, that sort of thing. But it's got the 45-degree angle rip in it, and there's the cutoff piece, the matching piece to this, which has the opposite bevel, is attached to the wall with 3 screws, just like that. So this just hangs right onto it, and it's very secure. The whole thing was made for nothing, more or less nothing. I didn't buy anything. It was just made from scraps I had. Old dishwasher, a bunch of kind of crappy plywood, which had some smaller pieces that weren't so crappy that I could cut off and use. This is underlayment plywood, which worked okay for that. These knobs are made out of a little bit higher quality, little tiny scraps of nicer plywood that I had. The bell, I don't remember where that came from. It was either a yard sale or might have been Amazon, but whatever it was, I suppose I spent something on that, but not much, if anything. And the numbers are all pieces of 1x scrap, which I seem to have more than I can get rid of, possibly. The outer bezel is another piece of 1x scrap, and the screws are from my never-ending supply of salvaged screws. Perhaps I'll do another video about this in the future, but hopefully you liked it. Thanks for watching.